Hey everyone, welcome back to Opinion Party. I'm your host, Laura Jones.
I'm Jason Gaikowski.
And this is the podcast that dispels the most pervasive myths in modern marketing through the cold, cruel lens of data. And today we're going to have a little fun and talk about laughs or liability, the true value of brand humor. Got a great guest, an actual comedian, someone that's way funnier than Jason and I will ever proclaim to be. But Jason, what's your take? I mean, brands and humor, where's the data netting out?
Oh, that's a great question, right? Like, does it pay to be funny? And, when you look across our industry, what is pretty notable is sort of comedy and humor in brands like maybe reached a high point about 20, 25 years ago. Seems to have fallen out of fashion. The data suggests that it's coming back into vogue. Certainly, John Cook, our CEO, talked about humor at Cannes last year. And there is some evidence that the trend is kind of moving in back in that direction, right? When you look at the secondary research, you can see that maybe there's some fatigue around purpose, that there's a desire for people to feel connected. And I think we cannot discount the outsized influence of social media and the environment of social, maybe biasing brands in the direction of embracing humor. Went down the rabbit hole. There's some good data that suggests that there are some real benefits to leveraging humor in brand building. Research from Kantar suggests that you see very consequential upticks in receptivity, that humor makes ads more expressive and involving, maybe adds a little bit of distinctiveness. Some interesting research from Oracle says that you get about a 90% bump on recall and a 72% lift in likelihood to try a brand, right? That's pretty cool. 48% of consumers feel a stronger connection with brands that make them smile or laugh, and about 91% say they prefer brands to be funny. And among younger folks, Gen Z, that number is even higher at 94%, right? So like it feels like there's some good tailwinds for this. Now, as you and I both know, it's not like we have an attribute in BAV that says funny. Or even if I had an attribute in BAV that said funny, I don't know that I would trust it, right? Because humor is such a subjective topic. So the way we approached this is we went out and did a pretty big secondary research topic. We looked at what are the brands that are winning awards, what are the brands that are receiving significant recognition, what are the brands that are gaining the most traction in social media. And we were able to put together a list of 100 brands that are recognized in some way, shape, or form as really, really leveraging and embracing humor. Now, not all brands are the same. You see there's a pretty distinctive group, let's call them top tier, of about 10%. These brands are consistently funny. They're effectively funny. They seem to have really sort of made humor the core of what they do, right? You think about Geico. Mm-hmm. You think about Wendy's, right? Kind of all funny all the time. There's kind of a secondary level, let's call them 11 through 20 or so, that are like pretty highly effective, not quite as good as the top tier. Jack in the Box, Poo-Pourri, Liquid Death. You've got Mint Mobile and a lot of the Ryan Reynolds brands kind of floating around in that territory, very effectively using humor. And then you've got kind of a third tier, consistently humorous. Mountain Dew, Farmers Insurance, Reese's, Oreo, Starburst, Pop-Tarts, right? So we looked at this group of about 100 brands, and then we started analyzing them through BAV data. And there's some pretty interesting trends that begin to stand out. Humor is really dominated mostly by three categories. You've got fast food, you've got Wendy's, you've got Burger King, you've got Jack in the Box, right? Like humor really seems to be something that fast food gravitates towards. You've got candy and snacks. Now we can quibble whether that's one category or two, but for our purposes, we're saying candy and snacks, whether it's cookies or Starbursts, right? There's a big center of gravity in humor that you see in candy and snacks. And then one of these things is not like the other. You have insurance. Somehow, fast food, candy, and insurance. Those are your major humor winners in the brandscape. Now, you see an interesting distribution of the funniest brands through the power grid. Interestingly enough, the funniest brands, about 58% of them show up in the leadership quadrant, right? They're in the top half for strength. They're in the top half for stature. Interestingly enough, there are almost no representation in the unfocused or the momentum quadrants. You only see about a 3% representation of generally low strength brands in low strength, low stature in the unfocused category. And you see almost nobody, again, 3% high strength, low stature, right? You see 38%, 37% over in the kind of fatigued, eroding quadrant. Now, you really see humor showing up around relevance and knowledge, right? And what this begins to suggest to me is that humor may be a pathway for more established brands to break out of category norms, to gain differentiation, to gain levels of esteem and restore balance, right? I think it's an interesting place. I think it's an interesting play. And while it is true that 58% of the funniest brands in America are leadership brands, when you look at the total broad brandscape, only 2% of leadership brands are consistently funny. Right? So it's an interesting space. I can't wait to get into this with our guest today, an actual comedian with a BAV background. I think this is going to be a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, let's bring out our friend Fumi Abe. Welcome to Opinion Party. Great to have you.
Hello, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to give everyone just a little bit of grounding on you, your background, and why you, better than Jason or I, are equipped to talk about funniness, because you're an actual funny person. You are a Japanese-American stand-up comedian, writer, and podcast host, renowned for your sharp, relatable humor and insightful storytelling. Based in LA, he's gained recognition for appearances on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, as well as being featured in Vulture's prestigious Comedians You Should and Will Know. That's very definitive, in 2023, and selected for the Just for Laughs New Faces Showcase. Your comedy explores themes of cultural identity, growing up as the child of Japanese immigrants, generational differences, and the humor in everyday struggles. And, you know, a whole host of accolades here. Suffice to say, Fumi is bona fide funny and a rising star. And on top of all of that, happens to have worked as a BAV analyst back in the day. So it's great to have you back. And Fumi, let's kind of just jump right in, because you've lived this fascinating double life in marketing and comedy. And just what's more painful to watch, a brand trying to be funny or a comedian bombing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was thinking about it while you guys were talking. Also, by the way, when you guys were talking about like power grids and stuff, that really brought me back to like 2014. So thank you for that. That was really nice. Yeah, you know, I think I'll probably have a different opinion about this, because I think a lot of people who've attended comedy shows, whether it's improv or stand-up, and they're watching somebody, you know, completely bomb, they're very uncomfortable watching it, you know. But as somebody who like does stand-up, I've been doing it for like over 10 years now. You know, I've also bombed. I bomb a lot. You know, especially when I'm working on new stuff, or sometimes like there's not a lot of people in the audience and the vibe is weird, and so you bomb. Everybody bombs, you know, and so. To me, when I watch a comedian bomb, like I know people are uncomfortable, but I think it's kind of funny because I know what that feels like. But also there's something very beautiful about it, because, you know, there's just something so beautiful and funny about how like these people are like trying so hard to like connect with the audience and like chase this thing. that is like, because like stand up is like you have to be so authentic, you have to be so real. It's a live animal, I always say, right? It's not like you can't just like practice your skit or bit or whatever in your room and just say it. It's not going to work. It's not a speech. It is a live thing you're creating together. And so this guy or whatever, like this comedian person is just trying so hard to connect, and it's just not working at all for 10 minutes, and it's just silence. And so to me, there's something so beautiful about this pursuit. So I like it. I like watching comedians bomb. It's like nice and refreshing. But I could see that maybe an average person wouldn't like that. But I think when brands try to do that stuff, it's and I think I'm actually curious to hear more about like how you guys define funny in terms of brands and marketing and stuff, because sometimes I ask, like, can companies really be funny? Because to me it's like, if you like, the whole point, like, I don't know, I think of course everyone can be funny, but there's such a difference between like stand up and like comedy writing, and like there is like an art to it, and I think it's a lot of it is like intent. Like, what is your intent? Like, am I trying to actually connect with you, trying to relate to a stranger on some level, right? And I think there's something really cool about that and like artistic about that. But I think a lot of times companies, like, the intent is like to make money, so like there's such a limit. And if sometimes it's funny, but when it's not funny, it's really cringe, because it's like, not only are you not funny, but I hate this whole energy, And so I think, to me, that's like way harder to watch than somebody chasing their dream and it's just not happening for them.
Yeah, completely. And Jason, why don't we set a little bit of stage for, you talked about some awards potentially that we're using to say, hey, brand funny, not funny. What are we talking about when we're talking about, can brands even be funny? I mean, Fumi, that's a really, really excellent point.
There's certainly work that's generally regarded as funny that gets recognized at Cannes and other creative awards shows. A lot of the Wendy's work that, we've been part of as part of that partnership, like, has really received a lot of recognition. And, interestingly enough, the social voice of Wendy's for many, many years was a large, red-headed, bearded man with a background in improv and stand-up comedy. And so I think there was something really bold and interesting about putting someone who was authentically funny in that role, and then kind of getting the corporate shackles out of the way. Beyond that, it's really looking to like the D&AD Pencil Awards have a special category for humor. You see Webby Awards around comedy and branded video content. It's not as quantitative as I would like it, but there is a consistency of signals coming from a variety of sources that recognizes, like, yeah, these brands are funny some of the times, these brands are funny most of the time. Certainly Old Spice, the man you wish your man smelled like, pioneered a kind of abstract absurdist. Geico was really the leader in the insurance game to be more lighthearted and less serious. I happen to have had Allstate as a client back in the day and helped them through the pivot from "you're in good hands with Allstate," very self-serious, to more of the mayhem character, right? So that, like, humor is so subjective and so situational and so ethereal that it's hard to create a authoritative, quantitative way to judge funny yes or funny no, right? And so what you really just do is you look at the totality, the qualitative inputs, and go, yeah, these guys seem to be funny, and they seem to be having success with it.
Fumi, can you talk to us a little bit about your creative process? Obviously, having some sense of an audience is really important in creating and writing humor. What have you learned from your creative process, and perhaps how might that be able to help marketers think about, if they're endeavoring to become funny, what they should keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a general creative process, but again, like, just a reminder, like, I do stand up. That is like my main thing, and that's like comedy coming. So I'm also like not a marketer anymore, so maybe nothing I'm saying has value. But
once a marketer, always a marketer.
I'm always
That's a good
thinking
thing.
like, yeah, I'm always thinking like, ideas for me, like things that would be funny coming out of my mouth, not necessarily from like a brand. But so like my creative process is like, I think like, you know, anybody who's like in the creative world, like you never can really stop working because you're just sort of like, you're just living life and something funny happens or like something makes you feel, right? Like you're having a conversation and maybe you feel anger or frustration and you find something interesting in that. So I have like a notepad app, and I just like every day I just write down just like any idea that I have, like just, you know, this woman said this to me today. It's not even funny in that moment, but it made me feel something, you know? So I like just write down a bunch of that. And then every once in a while, like I'll sit down, like I'll just go over these notes. And then I just like talk to myself for like a while. I just walk around my room and I try to just talk about it and figure out like why it bothered me or why I thought it was so funny or whatever. And then I just talk, and then eventually I'll just say something funny. And then I like write that down and I just kind of piece it together. And then like that's kind of how it like turns into a bit. You figure out like different angles of like why it bothered you, and then how you think it can like relate to the rest of the world or make it universal. You know, that's how I do it for stand up particularly. I think for like other types of writing, like TV writing or like writing for other companies, like, you know, it's similar. Like you're just always just sort of like observing life, because essentially like a joke or humor, especially if you're doing it from like a brand level, like it has to be like fairly universal. You know, it can't be too niche unless that's what you're trying to do. So it's really, really important to like live life. I think there was like a really famous Haruki Murakami quote. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's something about how like if you're just like staying in your room all day, like working, you're only going to be able to write about staying at home and working, you know? And so it's like really important to like go to Hawaii or like whatever, like go out there, like go try different things, go meet people you don't like, you know, go do that thing that you're dreading. Like all that is like so important for comedy and inspiration.
Yeah. Fumi, I think you said something that was really, really important there, which is I think about, and this is paraphrasing, things that would be funny coming from me, right? And that from a marketing perspective, from a brand perspective, knowing what your brand is. I mean, again, you would think it's just kind of like, like we actually do a lot of character work with brands where we are looking at, from a quantitative point of view, we actually use BAV attributes for this. And we're figuring out what is the right map that the data tells us to say, all right, what are the dimensions of how a brand could show up that could be differentiating or that can work against some of their equity goals. But then oftentimes we create a character out of that. And there could be many different ways to be a character. I mean, you could be kind of a spy, right? But are you like 007 or are you MacGyver, right? There's very different ways that you would approach an audience or create content depending on what type of audience you are. So not only is it important to know your audience, it sounds like, but it's important to know yourself and 100%. To know what you can say. And
yeah, I think like the first step, and I think this is something that a lot of like, you know, writers or comedians talk about. They always say like, what's your voice? You know, what is that thing? What are your values? What is that thing that you stand for? And that is so important. It takes a long time to discover that. You know, you mentioned like Old Spice earlier, like, you know, I think people think they're funny because they've been doing funny commercials for forever, you know? And I think like that you finally made that association, but like, you know, I think a lot of companies, just because of the nature of the fact that it's a Fortune 500 company, like they don't always know what their values are when it comes to like commercials. So you know, like for example, like you guys remember like the whole like Bud Light scandal with like Dylan Mulvaney? Do you remember that? Right? She was like a trans, you know, content creator. And then they got this backlash, and then, you know, Kid Rock shot some machine guns, and then they got scared that their market share was going down. So what do? They partnered with Shane Gillis, like the broiest, you know, Eagles fan, really popular comedian who got like fired from SNL for like saying something racist on podcast or something, and like right, and I like his stand up, you know, but like it's just like they do a commercial with him just to appease the people that they upset. So it's like, you didn't even really want to support trans people. Like, what do you even stand for, right? Like, no one was asking Budweiser to be like super LGBTQ, you know, pro that. Nobody was asking for that. But they were just doing it because they were like, maybe we can make more money this way. And they're like, oh, never mind, we're losing money. Let's shift gears and go back to like our original. So it's like, to me, I hate all of that. It's like you don't even know who you are. And if you don't know who you are, you cannot be funny, you know? And I think like most companies don't know who they are because, again, they're just trying to make money. And so it's like impossible to find that. Some smaller brands can do it. Especially if it's like a startup or something like that can like pull it off, I think. You know, like Liquid Death, like I don't know if they're like funny, but like the concept of, you know, calling water liquid death is pretty funny. So like right. I think a lot of people are like receptive to like maybe a less serious commercial from those guys, right? But like, you know, Bud Light, P&G, like no one's expecting those guys to like be funny. And I think it's hard. It's actually really hard for those guys to be funny just because of you know, their motivations and stuff like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, a couple of things that you said. You know, I think it's absolutely easier for a challenger brand like to come in with some over-the-top humor, right? Dollar Shave Club being a classic example, right? When the category convention was all about like technology and the number of blade wars, you know, you've got this like really absurd, like over-the-top funny video campaign that like really built that business. There's another thing in what you're talking about, right? Which is number one, knowing who you are. What's funny for me? And earlier you talked about a comedian bombing, and you said they're authentic and they're really striving to connect, but they're also taking a big risk. Like in order to be funny, you almost have to be willing to bomb sometimes. And like what I see with clients is they so desperately want to be authentic, but that's hard because they don't really know who they are. And they say that they want to connect based on marketing metrics, but it's hard to really connect if you can't be authentic, if you don't know who you are. And then last but not least, the willingness to take a risk in order to forge an authentic connection. That's a big, big deal for marketers, right? And you reminded me of a conversation a number of years ago with a client in the CPG space. They were hugely envious of the Old Spice work. They're like, I want ideas like Old Spice, right? And we looked at the CMO and said, come on, like, are you really going to approve a piece of work where there's a shirtless black man on a horse saying absurd things? Like, if you guarantee me you are willing to approve that kind of work, I guarantee you our team will bring you that funny kind of work, right? So this element of risk-taking and willingness to bomb, I think is something that marketers really, really have a hard time with.
That's a really good point because like failing and risking and bombing comes with the territory, right? And I think it's hard to convince bigger companies to be like, hey, we can try being funny, but like it might not work. You know, they don't want to hear that. You know, they're spending millions of dollars into this commercial. They don't want to hear that. They want a bulletproof thing. And it's like, especially if you're not in the comedy space, like we don't know how it's going to go down because you are a soap brand. We have no idea, like, right? So right. That's a really interesting point. Like people, yeah, it's the classic, like they want the result without the risk and the work, you know? And, you know, Old Spice, I'm sure not all their commercials were a hit, you know, right? But they spent years building this sort of brand as like the goofy brand. And so like, yeah, that's an interesting point.
Oh yeah, I mean the Hellman's Mayo Cat work from the Super Bowl last year. I think it's funny as hell. My wife thinks it's atrocious and dumb, right? And that creates a really interesting dilemma for marketers.
And you bring up a great point, which is just the notion of subjectivity, right? And what's funny to some people is not some people's idea of a good time. Do you think a brand or even a comedian is there only one brand per entity of funny, or can brands or people operate? Can you have multiple voices, I guess is what I'm asking.
Wait, sorry, can you rephrase that first part of the question?
Sure. So it's really important, as you said, to have a voice, and a singular voice sounds like is a way to be consistent with finding your audience, finding humor. But what if you're a massively targeted brand that has a whole bunch of different people and they ostensibly have a whole bunch of different tastes when it comes to comedy. Do you think a brand can vary its voice or play humor on different levels, or does that voice in the comedy arena have to be completely consistent?
I think. Are you asking like if a brand can take on multiple comedic voices or just
Yes.
different multiple? Okay.
Multiple comedic voices.
Yeah, I think it. I think there has to be some sort of common thread. I was just like, I was reading your outline, and it's so funny because like I don't even really watch commercials anymore because I pay for YouTube Premium, and like that's typically where I like used to get commercials, and then I just upgraded my Netflix so I don't get commercials on there either. But like I remember my girlfriend was telling me about this commercial that she saw. It was from PNC, the bank, and it was like the family is like trying to figure out ways to like build wealth, and the mom has taken up this responsibility of like being a finance bro. So she's wearing like a vest and she's got like multiple computers at the dinner table. And while they're like eating dinner and the kids are talking about school, she's like teaching the kids about like penny stocks or something. And then like the button is, we cut to PNC Bank, a bank teller, and she goes, or you could just work with us or something. And then the whole thing is like, you don't have to do the work. Like PNC Bank will do it for you. And the joke is the mom goes, okay, cool, but I'm still keeping the vest. That's like the last joke. And like, PNC is like a bank, but that was pretty funny and like pretty lighthearted. And I think sometimes a category like finance can be so daunting for a lot of people that something like that may make someone with some money who doesn't know anything about investment be like, oh, maybe I'll look into that, So like if they want to do that kind of thing for different targets, whether it's Gen Z or elder millennials who just never really learned about investing, which like there are a lot of people like that, especially comedians. None of us have retirement plans. It's hilarious. But like depending on like if you want to break that into like different demos or whether it's based on age, gender or class or whatever, I think you could make a series like that. Commercial could be a series, but like do slightly different jokes to appeal for different ages. I think you do stuff like that. But I think it would be unwise for like for Gen Z, do like a partnership with Addison Rae or whoever the new TikTok person is, and then like for boomers, you do a thing with like George Bush or something. Like that wouldn't make any sense, right? Like don't like, and then that would cost you so much money. But like stuff like that wouldn't make any sense. So I think you can do like different strategy, but like I think just to preserve your like again, proving to people constantly who you are as a brand, you have to have some common thread. Maybe that common thread for PNC Bank is like, don't be afraid or something, like maybe it's like, finance is not that scary. Maybe that's your common message and you can have different comedy ideas based on that, but it can't be like, don't be afraid for Gen Z. And then for the older people, like have something else for the one percenters, that's like conflicting messages, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it sounds like having a premise and then being able to do a variation on the theme would work. And I think that's solid advice because obviously with comedy or with any other culturally relevant type of messaging, you're going to have to be reactive and, like you said, be observing what's going on and agile and changing. So, but having a structure that works and that can be flexible sounds like is a good strategy for that. You were talking like someone who knows a thing or two about marketing, Fumi.
I think about the power grid once a day. It really helps me get through life. It's so cool that it's still happening, it's
30 years and
yeah, all the historical data
going strong. Actually, speaking of, let's talk about insurance for a while. I mean, Jason, you mentioned, I think it's kind of funny, not funny, that insurance brands, the most dull, boring, no one wants to think about it category, actually use a ton of humor. And they have created a bunch of characters, iconic characters, characters that have been consistent over time. What do you think works about comedic characters for brands? Why do you think that's such a popular technique?
Well, it's one of a couple of styles that you're able to kind of break the different brands into different sort of comedic styles or comedic approaches. And one of those is kind of more situational comedy. right? And you can think about State Farm and the work that I've certainly seen a lot of with Patrick Mahomes and Kelsey Auto Insurance for home and auto, which is kind of funny depending on your sense of humor. State Farm and Geico both kind of hit that situational comedy thing. Progressive with Flo, that's just a funny character, right? Far more sort of character based. Geico kind of plays it both ways with recurring characters and situational comedy skits. Fumi, what do you think? What are the insurance companies doing right, doing wrong?
I don't know if you guys have the answers to this, but I am curious to know if being funny as an insurance company actually makes a difference in the sign up numbers or the clients that they take, because I think similar to like gas stations, people just want the cheapest auto insurance, right? Like when I lived in New York for 13 years, I didn't drive at all. When I moved to LA, I had to get a car, and yeah, like of course I looked at like Geico because I just their commercials are so prevalent and stuff like that, but I just called all of them and I went with the cheapest one because it's LA and it's so expensive out here. So it's like I guess they're trying to do it because it's one of those things where like insurance, like everybody has to have it. Like if you have a car, you have to have insurance. So I think their goal is not to be hilarious, and it's more about like kind of like I don't think Geico is a funny brand. I just think it's like that little guy is like cute and he feels more like welcoming in a way, like welcoming, accessible, if that makes sense. I know there's that one insurance company, Mayhem. Which one is that?
Mayhem is
Allstate. Yeah, like that guy is scary. He's always like he's like dying in these. I don't know why they keep doing that. I'm not sure if it's working for them. He's like always dying, and so like that's fun. I actually did not call Allstate when I was looking up car insurances, but like Jake from State Farm. He's just like a nice looking guy. Like your friendly neighbor. Like I don't think these people are trying to be funny. I think they're just trying to like make. It's all about like awareness, and I think sometimes like comedy is a really good way to spread awareness if it's funny. In the way that like the WhatsApp commercial was like an insane thing for awareness, right? Like I knew what Budweiser was when I was 10 because of that commercial, and I didn't know any other beer brands until much later when I could drink legally, So I think that's like kind of the goal for insurance companies.
Yeah, well, it's certainly our insurance is. I mean, they're interesting as a category, though not unique as a category, in that the product is really hard to differentiate, right? Because of regulatory requirements. It's really hard to differentiate on product. It's really hard to differentiate on price because the entire market is so price competitive and price sensitive and subject to regulatory requirements. It's expensive and hard to differentiate on experience. And so, we do see from Kantar and other research that comedy gets you more engagement. Comedy gets you more receptivity to the message. Comedy gets you higher levels of propensity. It gets you higher levels of persuasion, particularly among younger audiences. And, historically, Geico has been the singular strongest, highest strength, highest stature brand in advertising. In part because they were the first to move away from sort of more of we are a trusted institution that you can rely on in almost a paternalistic fashion, right? They seem to be the first to recognize that I can trust every insurance company. So I don't have to talk about that. I can be lighthearted. 15 minutes can save you 15% or less. So easy, caveman can do it and really change the trajectory that the entire sector now seems to be on.
Yeah. So Fumi, you mash up a lot the concepts of cultural identity and humor. And I'm curious how you think about those two things when you're figuring out how am I going to be connected with an audience and make it funny versus where's the line to cross? Because I think a lot of brands would like to use humor, but also like to connect with people on that more intimate kind of identity-based level. But can be a really, really tough needle to thread. So what are some of the techniques that you do to be able to do that?
When you say that, are you talking about like brands wanting to do something for like a specific culture? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Or just,
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I understand the concern. I feel like sometimes these companies feel like, they put a lot of pressure on themselves. Like, oh, what does Geico want to say about Diwali or something? And again, nobody is asking for that, right? Like, if you want to like do a commercial for Diwali, like just partner with like a funny Indian person, or whatever that culture you're talking about. Like, just do like a celebrity endorsement. It doesn't have to be a celebrity. It could be like an influencer. Let them be funny, and then like your logo is in the background, and people be like, oh, they did like, did you see that Mindy Kaling thing that she did with Geico? Like, it'll just spread because Mindy Kaling is funny, and then like you can just offload this responsibility of like, did we get every single detail correct? Because then you're not saying anything about every Indian people, right? You're just saying like, this one partner, this one celebrity, Mindy Kaling is like this. Right, I think that's like the thing is like sometimes when companies try to be like, yeah, we know what it's like to be Asian, it's like that's a crazy thing to say or do. Nobody's asking for that. But if you did something with like Ronnie Chang on like a specific product, you can like speak to that group without kind of bearing the responsibility for like accuracy and stuff like that, because we're just saying like, oh, like Ronnie does it this way. And that's it. That's all you're saying, And I think a lot of people do it the same way Ronnie does it for Chinese New Year, whatever you're trying to do. But, you can just sort of like relieve yourself of that responsibility. I think people make the mistake of like, they use some guy, just some like regular commercial actor, and then you think you're making a statement about Kwanzaa or whatever, And it's like people just get like, I think people don't like the intent of that. This intent of like, we're trying to reach everybody in the specific segment that we're trying to talk to, and it's like that's impossible. You don't know us, and just being like real about that, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, authenticity seems like it's a really important tenet.
Yeah, and I think comedy. Like authenticity, but also like specificity. Like if you're really specific, you can be universal, and then you're not claiming to know the experience of every Japanese American. Like I always like emphasize like, this is my life, and a lot of people do relate with the things I'm going through. But some people, not everyone is a Japanese person who grew up in the Midwest. Some people grew up in California or New York, and they had a completely different upbringing than me. And so like I would never claim to speak for all Asian Americans or whatever. I just say like, this is my life, and I hope you relate, and I hope that non-Asian people relate too. That's ultimately the goal, and I think that they do. But like, yeah, I think like just reaching universally through specificity is like such like a thing I cannot stress enough for anything that is like creative related,
Absolutely. You said earlier, I don't watch commercials. I've got YouTube Premium, but you also just brought up the concept of influencers. It sounds like an influencer marketing. How have you seen the worlds of influencer marketing and social and comedy and brands kind of collide from your side of things of being a content creator?
Yeah, that's interesting. I did say that, but you're right. Like I am seeing commercials through like SponCon and like that kind of stuff on my feed. Yeah, brands are getting sneaky, man. They're paying my friends to advertise. I don't know, whatever Logan Paul's stupid drink is. Yeah, I'm sorry. What was the question?
What are your thoughts on that? Is it a good thing for comedy? Is it a good thing for brands? What's the best way to go about that?
I think it's a good thing for brands in terms of like, I mean, I think any person under 35 would be lying if they say they haven't ever bought like pants from an Instagram ad. You see like some sort of like cool pants from like some fake Japanese company. You're like, oh yeah, that sounds sweet, and then you like. You're like putting in your credit card information on Instagram and buying it for like $90. So it definitely, I think it is effective simply because a lot of people just are not seeing commercials in the traditional way that they used to. And then, yeah, I think like targeted ads and like sponsored content through influencers and stuff, it just feels less commercially. But although I do think it's changing, I think I don't know about Gen Z, but because I'm a little older, but like I feel like people in my generation, like we can sort of like suss out, oh, is this like model really into this brand, or is she just getting paid like $30,000 to say this kind of thing? Like we're past that initial phase where it was like, oh, this is so cool. It's like a new medium. Like I'm getting influence from these sponsored content or whatever. But now it's like everybody's doing it, so you have to kind of step back and think like, oh, does this model actually care about these particular sandals that she's wearing or whatever, But I like it. It's like a little microeconomy on its own, and a lot of times like I think people follow influencers and stuff because they're aspirational. You want to be more like them, and so you can see them wearing stuff. And I don't know, like there's something about like shooting in your iPhone camera that makes you believe like that the product is real, if that makes sense. Like it's not photoshopped. It's shot on your stupid phone in your bedroom. She's got the same phone you have, so like the shirt must look like that. There's more of like it's like more authentic in that way. I think that in a way that's like effective. But yeah, I'm for it. I did a thing for Harry's once. Harry's the shaving company. I can't even grow facial hair. Like I'll do it. They pay me $10,000. I'll do it again. Happily. Like I as somebody who partakes in sponsored content, sometimes I'm for it. I like money.
Amazing. And you talked about a little bit of the evolution, right? How are we going to continue to fool the next generation of capitalist recruits? But in all seriousness, we talked a little bit about AI in a pre-show conversation and how everyone seemingly now is tapping into it, relying on it for some aspect. What's the conversation about AI outside of it's going to steal all our voices and, we hate it and unions? What's the conversation in comedy world? How are you comedians using it for good, for evil?
Yeah, I think like just from like just my own personal perspective, like it's not like I've tried it because I've been interested in it, but it's certainly not good enough to like it cannot write a good joke for you. Like it might help you write like a pun, or like if you want to write like a very corporate Instagram caption, it's very good at that. Very like soulless, So like I don't think it can really do anything at this point. But that said, like I think I got like an email from the WGA recently about how like I think it's been proven that some companies have been like feeding scripts to make this machine smarter, even though they're not supposed to, because that's RIP. I'm starting a new job in January that's like for like a TV show, like TV writing, and then they made me sign like a thing that said like I won't use AI or like all right, or original. Like they made me sign a thing, and I remember like when I signed a similar contract for like a different writing job in 2021, like we didn't have ChatGPT back then, or it wasn't readily available, so there was no document like that. So I think production companies and showrunners are like taking it very seriously. I don't think they're like afraid that writers are going to be lazy and just use ChatGPT, because again, like the ideas on there are not good yet. So it's not going to replace writers, but it's like this concept of like, oh, if I upload a script to get ideas, then now the machine has the IP that Universal has been working on or whatever. So I think that's where the conversation is. I mean, I don't know. It's just I was talking to like a writer friend of mine, and like this is such like a writery thing to say, but if like it cannot, it's not good, right? ChatGPT is not good for comedy or like creative work as of right now. But if it gets to a point where like it can just in 5 seconds spit out a script that's as good as like something like Michaela Cole's like I May Destroy You on HBO. I don't know if you see that. Like any of these shows that are like truly incredible, iconic, like changing the way we're doing comedy, changing the way we're doing drama. If it can write something like that, then it's like not even. Then it's no longer a question about like AI is stealing my ideas. It's more like that AI is conscious, and so this is wrong. Because now this is like slavery. You know what I mean? Like if it can feel like a human and like write something that would make you cry, you read it, you're like, this is so beautiful, then it understands what we understand as humans, and then it's like no longer, right? It's not a conversation about like, can this AI do my PowerPoint? It's more like we need to release the AI. Like we need to help them or something, So I feel like, I don't know, I feel like comedians and writers like talk about it in that way from like a legal standpoint, but also from like a morality standpoint.
Yeah, there's definitely something that's lost, right? And as people that write for a living like yourself, and then people that pretend to write because they work in advertising, like us, there is something about the process of being human that comes out in thinking about the ideas and the collaborating. I mean, you just said you're going to be joining a writer's room, right? Just what happens when brains bump up against one another and ideas come out, and what's lost, not just in terms of wages and innovation, but humanity, when people are no longer coming together to create. And that's a harrowing view into the future. And, I think something that we as marketers are also probably going to be quite responsible for. If you think about the ways in which various groups were depicted in marketing and advertising, such as women, et cetera, and the impact that it had on countless generations of people and body images and all of that, and social media. I mean, marketers are very much complicit in the social media economy, that being one of our main channels. And so this is definitely a next frontier that we all, I think, have the responsibility to play a very active role in shaping. There's nothing funny about that at all, actually. I don't know why. I just went off on that little bit of a rant, but I do.
No,
think,
AI is dark, man.
Important.
AI is dark.
All right. So I guess, let's, if you had to go back into the marketing world, you were a brand manager, let's end on this one. And your remit was just create funny moments, get eyeballs. What is the one channel or medium that you would create in? What would be your what's your favorite for comedy? Can you
my favorite medium for comedy?
For a brand.
Oh, for a brand. Okay. I mean, I feel like it's like all social media now, I mean, that's not like a unique answer, but
you have a favorite.
Do I have a favorite?
Yeah, where do you?
I
yes.
hate all of them, Laura. I hate all of them. I wish.
Where are you putting your budget, Fumi? Where are you putting your budget?
I wish we never had TikTok and Reels. Like it has made careers, but it's just like it's just so. I don't know. I was talking about this with a friend yesterday, and I'm honestly, I don't know if you guys have done like BAV studies on this, but I feel like the BAV model really, we talk up differentiation, right? Like you got to be unique, but I actually feel the opposite about like TikTok and like social media, because I feel like if it's not shareable, it cannot go viral. And so like relevance is so important, and it doesn't even have to be an original idea, right? Like what is a trend? You just do somebody else's joke and then it goes viral because you're wearing a different outfit. Like, but that's how people get famous. People get famous when doing other people's dances. So it's like, it's this weird thing of like, I don't even know if that, I mean, it's not 100% of the time, but I don't even know if like, it'd be interesting to look at like a different slight variation of the BAV model for TikTok and Instagram Reels specifically in terms of like success. Because if you're too different, they're like, this is weird, and they just move on. They just want to see, people are kind of basic, I think is what we're finding out through these apps. Like people just like, they're not that unique, and they just kind of want to see the same thing over and over again. And so, yes. So going back to that, yeah, I guess, well, TikTok is, going to be banned, I guess, in like 2 days or whatever. So I guess like stick with an American company like Instagram. Shout out to Meta. I would do something on Instagram Reels, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if I reframe a little bit about what we've learned through BAV, if you want mass exposure, right, what you really want to lean into is relevance and esteem. You want to figure out what people like and what's relevant, and then just play that hand, right? And so hijacking a successful concept, doing it yourself with a slightly different shirt and your very handsome Asian American persona, and like you can go viral. I can't. Laura can. Let's just be really clear about these things.
But you could, you could
but,
have a thing. You're like the old guy who does it or whatever. Like I swear to God, dude. Like it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter.
After the holidays,
yeah.
We'll run that experiment, right? But then, what I'm gonna suggest, however, is sufficient differentiation still matters, right? Because if only old guys did it, it would get played out really, really quickly, right? But doing the thing that is relevant, that people like, doing it as an old guy, that's the differentiation that really makes it strong and lets it grow. Right. And so like, I do think even the lens of BAV, differentiation, relevance, esteem, knowledge, super relevant, super important for brands to break out, comedic or no, in social media, and to build strong, healthy growing brands. So
yeah, you're both right. I will bring this home with one of the principles of improv, which is yes and yes, differentiation,
gross,
and relevance. And with that, I think we've all sufficiently insulted one another, and it's time to go. So, Fumi, it was so amazing to have you. Thank you so much. Where can everyone find you out in the world if they want to know more about Fumi?
Yes, please follow me on all the socials. I post a lot of stand-up videos on there. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at the Fumi Abe. That's spelled TheFumiAbe. I'm also on tour. So if you live in a city in America, I'll probably be coming to your city. So please go to fumiabe.com and you can see my tour dates. I'm coming to like Dallas, DC, San Francisco, Charlotte, all kinds of places. So please check me out if you liked what I said and come see me live and support me financially.
Amazing. Brands, hit them up. Thank you so much, Fumi.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Fumi.
All right, Jason.
I mean, he's a great party guest.
Right? I mean, who doesn't want a comedian
that guy
at their party? Yeah, a lot can be learned for people that create art for a living, and from people that create art for a living, from people who are creating art for a living on behalf of brands. Fascinating conversation. I think we learned a lot about partnerships and how partnerships are really important in the world of comedy and also the world of branding, right? I mean, sometimes it's just your voice is just not going to land that joke. You need a partner. You need someone who can put it in a way that is going to go a lot farther faster. So big fan of brand partnerships in the comedic world. And what are your takeaways, Jason?
Well, I mean, I think that humor may pay. I think that making people laugh is it's a good angle, at least at a campaign level for a lot of brands, right? Like be engaging, be friendly, be authentic, be fun loving, right? And I think that there's some benefits the brand can accrue, but beyond that, I don't think that comedy is a silver bullet for every brand, because it takes a level of self-awareness and frankly, a level of risk to, forge those sort of authentic comedic connections that really build equity and develop relationships. And I'm just not sure that's the right strategy for every brand, but it's certainly the right strategy for many brands.
Absolutely. Be specific to be universal. I think that was one of my favorite takeaways from Fumi. Well, that's about it. Wrapping up this party. Thanks everyone for joining. If you want to know more information about Fumi, his stand-up, or any of the data that we talked about today, check us out at theopinionparty.com. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe and share it around. And we will talk to you next time.
Thanks all. We'll see you next time.